The title of the show, Wholeness, is really about bringing together, like a togetherness of things that may or may not belong. In my work, a very important aspect is the idea something might be foreign to something, a little bit alien, a little bit different, and what's that? What does that mean for you to force some things together that may or may not be meant to go together? So, for example, sometimes I'm using drawings or paintings as material that I'm then collaging. They're not the same painting and they're not the same drawing pieces, but I'm using them and bringing them together in each individual work anyways, and trying to make something out of that. And in the show overall, I wanted to do the same thing, but on a, but looking at all the pieces together. So trying to fit works and bodies of work together that don't necessarily belong. That is an interesting problem to me that I wanted to see if I could play around with. So for this work and the show, I chose these two bodies of work that I felt for me were really different, and I wanted to see what would happen when they went together to create this togetherness, a wholeness, and a kind of question of whether I could bring it to some kind of sense of completion, a sense of wholeness, or not. It's the question that remains to be seen. And I just really enjoy the question itself. I enjoy the process. And for me, the process is everything. So what happens in the end, that to me is almost outside of it all. And for this work, the lighter series, the works on paper series with the picture frames, I used bulk material that my daughter had made with me on our kitchen table, my daughter Anne over here. So together we were making these drawings over and over again, making tons of drawings and just using it as like bulk material. And like that's as if that would be like, if I was going to make if I was going to collage using one object, but instead in this case, I was building the piece together using tons of different drawings and fragments of drawings as sort of like this larger sense of output that is then pieced together later on.
Let's move closer to the middle here.
Sure.
To get the full picture. So you have a larger of the older work and then a smaller of the new work on your left and right. Do you want to talk about one of them and the compare and contrast the other?
Absolutely, yeah. So the piece over here, the sort of greenish toned with the purples and the layered painting, that was one of the first works that I made in that series. So it is, again, deconstructed picture frame, a pretty heavy set piece. And I was interested in building up like a very heavy, thick paper type materials. In this case, it's using matboard. So it's like a really, really heavy weighted material. And using the paintings that I had made on them as collage material that I could then build out this, image, this abstract image from. And the tones in the pieces, the colors are very much like the types of painting colors that I would use, like the dark colors over here, the purples and the oranges. Those kind of color combinations are somewhat, together are things that I wanted to explore, whether they would be harmonious, whether they wouldn't be harmonious. Those were questions that I was interested in. And the work on the right, the lighter work on paper, that was totally different. I was like not looking at that at all in that case. So the lighter tone pieces are made using different materials on paper, like different types of rice papers and mat boards that had drawings on them, and just regular papers that had drawings on them. And often Anne and I would make them on the kitchen table together when she was home from school. So we would get out our crayons. I was using a lot of children's materials to make these drawings, and she also helped. So you can see some of the fragments of the pieces have drawings that she made in them. And together we were amalgamating my drawings, her drawings, and building up the image that would be like a fusion of several different drawings and abstractions that came together and became one new thing. So those are pretty much those ones.
Yeah, so do you want to, since we established the show, do you want to go into a little bit of your background as an artist?
Absolutely, yeah. So I am from Canada originally, and did my undergraduate degree there at the University of Guelph. Most people here have not heard of Guelph. Have you?
Yes.
You have?
My sister and my niece graduated.
Oh my goodness, that is wonderful to hear. Yeah, most people have never heard of it, and they don't believe that it's a real place, but it is. Yes, and it's a nice place. So I did painting there. I really started out as a painter. I always have been a painter, and I see everything I do through the lens of painting itself. So even though I'm not always working in painting, I am still making paintings, no matter whether I'm working with photography, whether I'm painting actually, or whether I'm doing collage and building up these, multi-dimensional works that way. They're always paintings for me. And then after that, I did my graduate work at Rutgers. And that was pretty much it.
And what about your featured artist?
This is Anne. She is a new artist. Do you want to say anything? No? Okay. She has a lot of experience drawing. She would always, work nearby me. We would do things together. And, I think it's only natural that her work, that we make things together, especially since, not always? Not always. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, so let's take if you want to sit in front of this grouping here, because I think it's really a lovely grouping of the work. So can you talk a little about you mentioned a little bit about the materials. So what are the differences in the materials between the older and the newer bodies of work, and the methodology? What's different about the methodology?
Okay. I would say that the methodology is almost the same. I tried to really keep to the formula that I used to make these works. I built them up in the same kind of thinking patterns. I asked the same kinds of questions as I was making them. But the materials are what is different. And in these cases, I had been using paint, gouache, Flashe, these types of vinyl paints and different paints that have sort of a plasticky consistency. I was very interested in the materials themselves and what kind of essence they have and what they are on their insides, and kind of try to dig deep and understand what that is. And I would be using that with molding pastes and all sorts of mediums and things that belong in painting and things that don't belong in paintings. Yes.
What kinds of things do you ask yourself before you start?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, you just want to repeat that.
Oh, okay, right, sorry. What kind of things do I ask myself before I start one of these works? Is that right? Yeah. I think that for every work, I usually have some different kinds of questions, but for example, I might be wondering, how can I make things that don't belong together, make them have a relationship? How can I make colors that I think may be somewhat considered sometimes not to jive together well? How can I make them sit together and have an interesting conversation? Those are the kind of questions I might ask. Also, I might be interested in asking questions about the frame, the picture frame, and, what does the frame do for some of the colors and formal relationships that we see? How does it interact? What exactly does it say to other things that are in each work? So for example, some of the shapes, formal questions about how things act together all together. Yeah, I would say those kind of questions, I would say. Also, another thing that I'm really interested in is the kind of translucency and transparency, the glass and painting behind the glass, over the glass, and what do the different textures, how does paint look and live when it's behind glass versus over glass? These kind of different material, little tiny gestures and how do they converse and, interact once, sitting side by side that way, things like that.
Could you walk us through your process of one of the pictures?
Sure. Do you have any one in particular?
How about the big one that's
This
next
one?
to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, so she wanted to know how, if I could walk you guys through the process of making one of these works. So I usually always start out with just bulk material production, where I'm just like constantly producing artwork, like it could be drawings, paintings, ink, just throwing color and trying to, just have a good time with, getting my hands like really dirty and trying to make a mess in the studio, making tons and tons of like painting fragments and just producing a lot of stuff, having a lot of studio stuff. And then I go and I start to like make relationships between some of them and build up slowly. I decide like what colors or what shapes are going to be underneath in like the first layer of the deconstructed picture frame, and then what should be behind the glass, what should be on top. And then sort of it's like a puzzle piece. I'm building it up like a puzzle piece very slowly. In the end, I'm trying to decide like, what does this say over here to this part over here? Is that like something that interests me, or am I bored? Like these are the kind of things that I'm doing. And then in the end, I have like my own way of making final touches, like, oh, it needs a little bit more thickness over here, or it needs a little bit more highlighted area over here. All of it, like, who knows if any of it actually is, accurate, but it's just what, I feel like I have this drive to produce works that have those kind of, that way of working. So, yeah.
Well, I love that, the idea of it being a game or a puzzle piece, like you're creating puzzle pieces and then making a puzzle.
Right.
I think that's a really interesting way of thinking about visual art as like you're gamifying visual art. That sounds very interesting to me.
That's cool. Yeah.
Before I saw the name WholeNESS,
Mm-hmm.
I was, and I looked at the picture, somebody asked me, what's the name of this? And I didn't see WholeNESS at the bottom. And I said, broken.
Oh,
because,
cool. Yeah.
It looks like the glass
Mm-hmm.
broken.
Yes, actually, it's wonderful that you bring that up, that you say broken, because one of the pieces in the show actually did have a broken element to it. While we were installing a show, I actually let go of one of them, and the glass shattered and dropped to the floor. And I thought like to myself, normally, like, I feel like I should be really upset. I feel like I should, be stressed out about this. But in the end, I was kind of excited. And I felt that that was an unusual reaction because I was curious to see what it would be like without the glass. I had been making all of these works always behind glass, and I am really interested in like the idea of what's behind glass and how things behind glass aren't supposed to touch them and you're not supposed to interfere with them. But what happens when, like, in all these works, I am very much painting on top of the glass and kind of breaking the glass in some ways and breaking that relationship with the viewer, or like just kind of having that different relationship. And in this case, that work over there, the ones that have these kind of, dips and stuff like that, it's without glass because that happened. So, yeah, I really like that, the idea of brokenness. Yeah, for sure. There's an element of that. In my opinion, I mean, like, my intention is definitely not brokenness in any negative way at all, but definitely in a formal way, for sure. Yeah.
Some of your material looks rather heavy. Is
Mhm.
that, I can't think, matboard or what?
Yes, yeah, you're right. It's mat board. I use a lot of the mat board. Yeah, you could. Yeah, thanks for asking. I do. I use a lot of the painted mat board. I use a lot of like inks on the painted mat board and things like that, and alternating with gouache and the Flashe paints. And yeah, I'm interested in that, the like heaviness versus lightness and all those kind of experiences of the materials themselves. Yeah, yeah.
I was going to say, just by looking at the works and not knowing ahead of time that the lighter colored works were a different series, I said to myself, this is very almost sinister in its approach, especially with the broken edges of the glass in there. I thought, I wonder what this message is gonna be.
Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, it definitely didn't have any sinister, intention. Certainly not. But I like am so interested to hear what you think about it, and like, those first kind of glances are like super interesting, exciting to hear about, because always like they're things that will, I'll think about later on. So for sure, yeah. And I appreciate that.
Well, you want to go into the color choices? So I feel like that's a very distinct thing in the show, is like the variety of color choices.
Yeah, absolutely. So like definitely there's, works, half the artwork in this show is like darker and half of them are lighter. Um, in terms of the colors themselves, I was interested in selecting works that would have difference, contrast, something that there would be like a heaviness and lightness kind of conversation to look at between the works on paper with the frame and the works that are painted with the frame. So with the colors, like I, generally have always worked with like a lot of like kind of moodier, jewel tone, kind of intense kind of colors that I'm really interested in. They've always been like, I've always used a certain type of palette, and this is the first time I would say in a long time that I've felt comfortable, trying a different palette. So the lighter works on paper, I think I felt a little bit freer to try something different, because I feel like in general works on paper, they're like they're just so much more malleable for me. Like they're kind of, you can just kind of throw them together and like see what works, and it's easy for me to feel less precious about them because they are, I can just choose another piece of paper, but it feels less permanent and less like final that way. But so I've been using, I tried using this kind of new palette of like including white and including beige and including ochre and things like that. Something that I hadn't used too much before. I think ochre I used a lot before, but I think that I hadn't, tried using some of these other colors, this other palette that is new to me. So yeah.
Influences
Okay.
first.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Recently, I've been really interested in this artist named Martha Tuttle. She makes like really interesting kind of stretched canvas pieces that don't use paint like really too much, I don't think. And she has like all these different amazing like fabrics and materials, or I'm not sure what papers, that she kind of like layers and creates these great abstractions that are using a lot of like geometric lines and things like that. They're really, really delicate, and they're really, really beautiful, and I really enjoy those. I find them like, I'm always thinking about her work when I'm making work. And also I'm really interested in Susan Freakon's work. So she's a painter that also is very interested in textures and like the difference between certain textures. You might see in one of her pieces like a big swath of like a organic shape that is like shiny and glossified, and then next to it might be like this amazing velvety matte area. So like those kind of differences. And she also uses like a really interesting rich palette that I'm super interested in. So yeah, like I definitely think about those people a lot in the studio.
Yeah. The one that comes to mind, and I might have mentioned it before, but Diebenkorn.
Oh, right.
Richard Diebenkorn.
Yeah.
I feel like that it's like you're kind of exploding a Diebenkorn to me, for like making different, a whole dimensional thing. So do you find that is there a similarity to the work, or do you think that there isn't,
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I really like appreciate that work as well. Definitely, like I definitely see some of that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Thank you.
I know that you have one of these, like just satelliting around you right now, but what are some of your non-art influences?
Right. Yeah.
The children being one of them.
Yeah, for sure. The children,
What
absolutely.
What influences that's
Yeah.
non-art in your work?
No, I mean, I think that I'm a mother, and like it's impossible for that to not seep through my work. Like right now, I'm just like using crayons sometimes to make artwork, and I think that that's just like so awesome. I really feel like there's so much potential in like crayons and chalk and like, Sharpie, and that's something I've really gotten into, and I never would have thought of, ever being interested in things like that previously, but definitely I feel like, I kind of feel like there is nothing that, isn't worthy of attention when it comes to material and art making. So like, I feel like there's, Sharpie is just as good as like the nicest paints in my opinion. that's my attitude towards it. Yeah.
And how's your daughter think of using, working with you in making these pieces? Is it like a daily practice, or is it a, once in a while thing? Like,
Yeah.
how's the studio?
The studio, right? The studio is all over. I think we have to ask her to find out what she thinks about it, but I think I'll ask her and get back to you. But what I think, we definitely do it a lot. It's not a daily practice, but it is definitely it's a frequent activity. It's part of our lives, our life becomes the art becomes the life, all that stuff, we work together all the time. It's often we're making drawings for her, often, and sometimes I'm like, oh, let's use that in my art, and she's like, okay, because she's so generous and is happy to. It's wonderful, and I really enjoy being a mother. I enjoy taking care of children so much, and I love that I can find moments of art in my life while I take care of my children, and also that everything can intermingle that way. It's like I find it to be a really meaningful and rewarding aspect.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm curious about the frames,
Mhm.
the sculptural element, I
Yeah.
guess, of the work, or the relief element of the work,
Mhm.
and how, like, you said you consider yourself a painter
Mhm.
first, right?
Yeah.
But there's like this very strong, like, relief/sculptural element. So
Mhm.
how do you find that in between space?
Yeah, for sure. No, I'm definitely interested in like the media and like in between all the media and like finding this kind of other area, this other place where I can exist that doesn't need to be just painting or just sculpture or just anything else. Definitely, there's like a sculptural object like element to like the paintings. I love that it's like a sliding scale. It could be a little bit more, or could be a little bit less. Some of them take on like a more sculptural element than the others, and I love like finding each one's own place where they can just exist in this kind of like stratus. I don't know. I don't even know how to say, but like, you know, um, it's really important to me. I've always felt that like everything is a painting, kind of like, whether you take a picture, that's still a painting for me. Like, those things, when I do it, I still think of everything as if it's a painting. It's the way that I see it. It's like built up in layers. It's like I think about the glazes. I think about the process of painting while I'm making anything. It doesn't matter what it is. So I like that it can, things can fluctuate. Things don't need to be one or the other, and you can be who you are. Yeah, and feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, probably my favorite question to ask is this one: what do you think about the current state of the arts?
Oh yeah.
So how do you feel about the arts in general, and maybe in New Jersey?
In New Jersey.
Feel about the quality of the art and the state of the art.
The quality for me, art is, it's my outlet, it's my, output, and it's, as I described, like when I'm making the works, we're making this bulk material. I'm just making like so much stuff that I'm using. I see it just like as part of life and living for me. That is, to me, it has ultimate value, whether you're the viewer, whether you're the artist making the artwork. It will always be relevant, in my opinion. As long as people are here on the world, we are expressing ourselves in different ways and, producing. And to me, art output is not that much different than any other kind of output, like any other kind of detritus, any kind of leftovers from society, really. And, I love that we can look at art and understand something about the times, understand something about society. And I feel like that as long as, we are here, art will be important, and it will be interesting to look at something and, understand that person in their space, in their own, whoever they are as a person, and basically everyone looking at their work, they're completing that piece. So it's wonderful. Mm.
So we'll zoom in now and say, well, what do you want the viewer to take away from your specific work? What is the not the one, but what are like a few takeaways? I know there can't be just one.
Right.
But what are a few takeaways that you want the viewer to kind of have as they leave the show?
Yeah. That's a really good question. I would say that, it's important for me that the viewer, just, has any experience with my artwork. I don't want to project what my artwork is or isn't to the viewer. Like, I'm not going to say I want them to think that it's, like, or have a certain feeling or anything. I don't. I really don't. I just, I'm happy for them to look at my artwork. I feel that they're an important part of my artwork, being seen, of course. Like, artwork asks to be seen. We don't make artwork for it to live in a closet. I mean, sometimes it does live in a closet, but that's separate. But no, like, just, have a relationship with it. I don't want to ask anything of the viewer, actually, Yeah. Oh,
Does somebody come
yeah, that's my other, yeah. Doing at the time. Yeah. That's mainly how they were titled. Like, whatever I was talking about, whatever I was thinking about, if I was, studying something, or if I was, like, reading something, if I was looking at that Canadian goose, it would be, like, named something about the Canadian goose. But the newer works, the works on paper that my daughter helped me make, those works do not have concrete titles. They're sort of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of thing. So that's a really good question. I still don't know why it's like that. I couldn't tell you. It's just what I felt. So maybe in a few years I'll understand.
Talking of names, can you speak to the name WholeNESS?
Yes, yeah, for sure. So we spoke about it, like, to get into a little more, I was speaking with my mother. I feel like I always enlist my family members to help me come up with my titles. And I'll tell them, like, everything about the artwork, or everything, like, I was doing in the artwork, and send them all the pictures, and then they come and, like, give me suggestions, basically. So we had, like, a very long conversation about what this show should be about, what should the title be, and all that. So in the end, I was interested in bringing together the separate bodies of work, two separate things that I didn't know whether they would belong or not, and I wanted to create a wholeness, a togetherness, and that kind of experience where something, like, maybe fits together, maybe doesn't, but trying to understand, is it going to come to a sense of completion or is it not? And then at the end, also, I do have ness,
Yeah, well,
capitalized. Yeah.
That's important.
It's definitely important. Ness is the idea of, like, a miracle in like Jewish thought, and that was just, I was excited about that, seeing that in the word. Yeah.
Oh, wow, okay.
Not in English, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah. So I was just like, sometimes I don't know whether, I definitely didn't, like, come to it thinking any of those things. Like, everything that I title or decide is always afterwards. It's always, like, looking back on what was made, on what happened, and then deciding something afterward. Yeah.
So, do we have any other questions for Dara? Did I miss something good?
Yes.
Please.
So your creative process is sort of dynamic. In other words, you don't always know how it's going to end, or even
Right.
have a clear idea sometimes. You might be in the middle of it, and then suddenly something inspires you to go this way or use this type of material, that type. Is that a fair representation?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's very much, noticing connections while they're being made, just working. Like, it doesn't matter what I'm doing. It doesn't matter whether I think it's good or bad. Like, it's not about that. It's just working and just living in it, sitting with it, trying to get through the process and seeing, is anything, peeking out? Is there anything that is standing out? Is anything, having a conversation and just taking a work from there. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
I don't know if it's me but I don't know if abstract art has become more popular because there are less rules in the world today.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Something, but I miss looking at a piece of art and saying, that's a tree, that's a house, that's a flower.
For sure. The recognition.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. I can understand that. Yeah. It's comforting to look at something and know what it is. Yeah, for sure. I understand that.
Kind of riffing on that, do abstract something, or is it non-representational? So
Yeah.
kind of a difference, right? Like you pull from something
Mhm.
that's, not abstract, or like does that, or is it something that you just jump into in a non-representational way of thinking?
Yeah. Definitely non-representational. Like I'm never trying to abstract like an object or a visual thing. Sometimes I'm thinking about ideas or sometimes feelings, and those get, somehow enter the work. But definitely never, thinking about an actual object and looking at them and making sketches. That's not something I do. If I ever do sketches, they would be like completely different because I can't like make a sketch of, I don't know what things are going to look like in 5 minutes from now, So it's always a surprise for me, and that's how I like it because I like to be surprised. Yeah, I want to personally be surprised by the artwork at the end. Hmm.
Well, any other questions for that? Or we get casual?
I do. I
Oh, yeah.
just wanted to
Please.
know, Dara, is this series that you have with basically the frames are an integral part of the series? Are there other series that you have done where you started with some other base ingredient?
Oh, really good question.
What else you may have, what other directions you may have gone?
Another
For
armature-
sure.
armature.
Yes, wow, good question. Thank you. Definitely, I work also in Duralar, so it's sort of like a acetate type product thing where it's like kind of like the same kind of flowing, kind of clear, translucent thing, but it's very thin. And I would paint on both sides of them. I make like long scrolling and like long, very wide, very, very long pieces that have stuff cut out of them, and using paint mostly on them, very thick, heavy-handedly, but they're very thin, so they have a different quality to them than these works, which are more like of a heavy type object-like feel. So that's one thing. And then like I also started a little while ago making photographs of the Duralar that I had like kind of created these environments using the Duralar and like in, domestic type spaces and, made photographs that way. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you.
Mhm.
All right.
Yeah.
So I think, well, I feel like that's a fantastic way to end. So thank you, Dara.
Thank you.
This wonderful exhibition.
Thank you so much.
Thank